So, today we're going to look at 1 Samuel chapter 2. If you want to turn to that would be great. We're going to see what happens when two rule-breaking sons are allowed to live wildly without any correction from their father. We'll discover that passive parenting often leads to disastrous results. Now, James Dobson, he wrote a bunch of books, and one of his books is entitled, Parenting Isn't for Cowards. Boy, is that ever true, huh? We could probably summarize him in this book in one sentence. Every discipline situation is a setting for discipleship. Now, this morning I'm going to be talking primarily to parents, but the principles are going to be for everybody. And we're going to make that challenge at the very end that is going to be a challenge for everybody here, whether you're a parent or not. So let me introduce this guy, this dad in Samuel. His name is Eli. He was a priest and a judge, well respected by everyone. But he had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas. They served as priests, but they were more profane than they were spiritual. In fact, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 12 says, Now the sons of Eli were scoundrels, according to the New Living Translation. The sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or their duties as priests. They knew about the Lord, but they didn't know him personally. They had holy jobs, but their hearts were far from him. They went through the motions, but God really didn't matter to them. When people brought animals for offerings, these brothers demanded the choicest cuts of meat. They would even take it by force. Here's what verse 15 says. The servant would come before the animal's fat had been burned on the altar. He would demand raw meat before it was boiled so that it could have been used for roasting. On top of that, his sons were seducing young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. Eli knew that people were talking about his sons. Look what verse 23 says. I've been hearing reports from all the people about the wicked things you're doing. Why do you keep sinning? You must stop, my sons. The reports I hear among the Lord's people are not good. While he did try to rebuke them, they refused to listen. Unfortunately, all Eli did was talk with them when he should have removed them from their position. His sin was not having bad children, but instead, he raised them inactively, parented them passively, and excused them meekly. This story ends pretty bad. God told Eli that his two sons would die on the same day, and they did. And when the messenger came to tell Eli that his sons had died, he fell backwards from his seat beside the gate, broke his neck, and he died. Well, we also see King David, who was a man after God's own heart. But he didn't do so well in disciplining his children either, especially his son Adonijah. Here's what it says in 1 Kings chapter 1. His father, King David, never disciplined him at any time, even by asking him, why are you doing that? Well, today we're going to talk about discipline to discipleship. And our first point, I'm following your notes now. If you're following along, I'm going with your notes. Discipline equals discipleship. The root of the word discipline is disciple. Discipline is something God commands parents to do for the purpose of forming their children into disciples. The word disciple means devoted follower. Therefore, the purpose of biblical discipline is to help your children become devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Failing to discipline is failing to disciple. God's plan for your children is to learn obedience and submission to loving their parents whom they can see, so they are ready to learn obedience and submission to loving God who they can't see. Every single discipline situation you face is an opportunity to lead your child toward being more devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Maybe as parents, our vocabulary has to change. Instead of having a discipline situation that needs to be dealt with, maybe we should have a discipleship situation. Focus on the attitude and the action, the root and the fruit, the why and the what. Our discipline/discipleship must reach into the heart of the child. You must ask your child questions that will expose the attitude of their heart. Expose that which created the wrong behavior within them. Point number 2, the difference between discipline and punishment. Someone once asked a parent of 3 young children, how much time do you spend as a percentage disciplining his kids? The answer was, maybe 85%. The other person responded, really, that little? See, here's the deal. Punishment is circumstantial. Something happens, we want to immediately punish. Discipline is a full-time endeavor, and it's much more difficult than punishment. Discipline takes longer. If you're just punishing your kids, you just put them in timeout. But when you discipline, your goal isn't just behavior, it's about the heart. And the heart formation takes longer than behavior modification. True discipline not only guards, it guides. Discipline requires teaching. We need to help our children understand not only what they did was wrong, but why what they did was wrong. According to one study, the average child asks parents over 400,000 questions before age 15. And one of those questions they ask over and over and over again, why? Hey, friend, that is a lot of opportunity for teachable moments, isn't it? Yeah. Well, the focus of discipline is deeper. Punishment is about behaving. Discipline is about becoming. You're seeking not to just break bad habits, but to instill a need for the gospel now that in your kids that will form just actions instead of just off the top of their head actions. And this will take years to develop. I put some parenting proverbs in your notes. We'll just read over them real quick. And these are just a few. Chapter 3, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. Chapter 13, a wise son heeds his father's instruction, but a mocker does not listen to rebuke. Later in 13, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline him. How many's heard that one before? We're actually going to unfold the meaning of this in our next small group. The Bible does not advocate anywhere child abuse. Chapter 19, discipline your son, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to his death. 22, folly is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. 29, the rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to himself disgraces his mother. And then 2 verses later, discipline your son, and he will give you peace. He will be the delight bring delight to your soul. So point number 4. Godly, serious discipline is a spiritual event. You know, when that little 2-year-old butterball starts clenching their fists and setting their jaw and determining not to obey, they need a cleansing. And that's exactly what a 6-year-old needs or a 16-year-old needs. Not all discipline is done by talking or reasoning together. Sometimes there needs to be a little active reinforcement. There is good purpose in appropriate pain. I mean, God uses discomfort to teach us that certain behavior is not good. Here's what one person said. He says, it's like when my grandson put his hand on the oven door and got a terrible burn. He says, I'll tell you what, he never goes anywhere near the oven door again. So let's talk about wise discipline. We said punishment is circumstantial. Discipline is a full-time endeavor. Discipline will also come in many methods. Wise discipline is age-appropriate and consistent. Wise discipline is not taking a teenager, tying them to a post, and lashing them like they do in some third-world countries. Wise discipline is not making your child walk up and down the street with a billboard on them that says, I'm a brat. I know some of you would like to do that at times. That's all right. Your parents probably did too. Wise discipline is helping our children understand how much Jesus loves them, and he will not put up with sinful acts. Wise discipline will cause us to teach our children to stay within the bounds that God has set up for us in the Bible. You know, in the Old Testament, we have the thou shalt nots, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, and thou shalt not. In the New Testament, he's given us the boundaries. You just stay within the bounds and you're good. It's important for children to get the message as they grow up that when you step outside of the boundaries, you have to pay the consequences. Parents must not fall into the habit of excusing away negative behavior because they ate too many Fruit Loops, or because they were not praised enough. Discipline teaches the consequences of sin. Do you know why Jesus was put on the cross? Sin. Sin. Yeah, that little lie put Jesus on the cross. What's so bad about a little white lie? Friends, whatever put Jesus, our Savior, on the cross is not a little issue. As we discipline our children, it's important to do more to deal with the heart. Sometimes we have to punish the behavior. I want you to take a look at Psalm 51. I'm going to put one verse up here. If you want to turn to it, you can follow along. I'm going to read some other verses to you. Let me set this up for you while you're turning to that. David had just committed adultery with Bathsheba. And then he created a way for her husband to be killed in battle. So God sent Nathan the prophet to confront David about it. And we're not going to get into the whole story. We're just going to look at the results of the discipline / discipleship of David's heart. Verse 17 says, "The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and a repentant heart, O God." But look what David wrote before he penned those words. Verse 7, "Purify me from my sins, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow." Verse 9, "Remove the stain of my guilt." Verse 10, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, renew a loyal spirit within me." Verse 12, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation and make me willing to obey you." Verse 14, "Forgive me for shedding blood." And then it comes back to verse 17, "The sacrifice you desire." It's not a bull on the altar burning. He says, "The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and a repentant heart, O God." Let's bring this home. In Ephesians chapter 6, Scripture says, fathers. And we could also use the term parents in there. "Do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord." Colossians chapter 3. Fathers, again we can say parents. "Do not aggravate your children, or they will become discouraged." Both passages contain the same exhortation. Do not provoke, though Ephesians adds to anger. Provoke is the type of word that you might use when you kindle a fire into flame. You begin with something small and you provoke it to a roaring fire. Paul uses it, though, in the negative sense of stirring or exasperating or irritating them. Irritating them toward bitterness and anger. He says parents must not provoke their children to anger. Next we read, "So they don't become discouraged." You see, a discouraged child is one who has lost heart. He is so beaten down that he's lost hope, he's lost motivation, he just doesn't care anymore. The Bible translated, "Lest he gets discouraged and quits trying." The idea here is that you can so beat down your children that they will stop trying to please you. Let's put it all together. God urges parents this way. Parents, do not provoke your children to anger, lest they become discouraged. On the heels of his urging, he offers a solution. He says, bring them up in discipline and instruction of the Lord. Don't beat down, raise up. Don't provoke with impatience and injustice. Instead, shepherd with nurture and tenderness. Do this through discipline and instruction. Discipline and instruction. These two words are key. Between them, they offer words of training and correction, words of admonition and rebuke, words that express both the positive and the negative sides of leadership. You need to correct your children, sometimes with a look, sometimes with a word, sometimes with a timeout, sometimes with a spank. I know my mom, man, if she was going to do something, man, she'd reach down to get her slipper, and she was good, she'd throw that sucker at you. And when I think about this, that soft slipper, what in the world was that going to hurt? But man, we were scared of it. The positive side is you need to teach them, explaining to them what is right, demonstrating to them how to live. You know, not do as I say, don't do as I do. No, do as I do, and I'll back it up with what I say. This little pair of words covers both the positive and the negative sides of learning and growing, helping our children go from folly to wisdom, from childlikeness to maturity, from self-centeredness to loving others, and hopefully from sin to salvation. So my question is, moms and dads, are you disciplined? What about those of you who someday want to have children? Or the rest of us? Are you disciplined? Are you personally working on discipleship? When it comes to our kids, do you wait until your child aggravates you enough that you lose it with them? Then you take action? Are you inconsistent the way that you handle your kids? Hey, they know what they can get away with. They know. I mean, you set the boundaries, okay? But they know where the real boundary is. You know, we use our boys a lot as illustrations in this series, especially at night. And I'm using Chris again, okay? We had this thing with Chris as a toddler. Yeah, he was real small at one time. We would tell him to do something, and then if he didn't do it, we'd 1, 2, and then he'd move before we'd say 3. Well, one day we were going someplace, and he was on his rocking horse, and he loved that rocking horse. That thing would go squeak, 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 squeak. Oh, man, it'd drive you nuts. But he loved to rock. Well, one day we were going someplace, and he was on that rocking horse, and Cindy said, "Come on, Chris, we're going to get going." And he didn't do anything. Squeak, 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 squeak. And she went over there and she picked him up and she went to swat his behind. And he said, "No, Mommy, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. See, they know the boundaries. So we've got to be consistent with them. Do you lack consistencies? Friends, is your concern for their eternal soul evident in how you are bringing them up with the discipline and an instruction that comes from the Lord? David, he says, "The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart." Maybe that's where you need to be today. You say, but I'm already saved. I'm not even talking about salvation. I'm talking about you living a disciplined and life of discipleship right now in your personal life that will transfer to your children's lives. Look what David prayed. He says, purify me from my sin, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I'll be whiter than snow. Remove the stain of my guilt. Create in me a clean heart. Renew a loyal spirit within me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. How many of you are lacking joy right now? There is joy in the presence of God, and that joy brings strength. Restore to me the joy of your salvation. Make me willing to obey you. And then he says, forgive me. Stand with me today. Forgive me. Where are you at in your life, friends? Whether you're a parent, grandparent, no parent, or wanting to be a parent, I'm talking to you. Male or female, I'm talking to you. Maybe today you need to come to this altar and not just stand at the altar today, but kneel before the Lord. Say, purify me, Lord. Remove the stain. Create in me a clean heart. Restore my joy and forgive me. Chris is going to lead us in a song. As he does, you step out from where you're at. You come to this altar and you get before God. Say, God, I want some consistency in my life. I want to stay within your boundaries. I want to do everything that I'm going to do to please you.